There's something deeply wrong happening at the Sea of Galilee. Israel is pumping millions of cubic meters of desalinated Mediterranean water uphill, through tunnels across the country, into what was once their most sacred freshwater source. And despite this unprecedented engineering effort, the lake is still dying. Water levels are dropping 2.5 meters per year, faster than any drought in recorded history. This isn't just a lake. This is the heart of a system that was supposed to save an entire nation. And right now, that system is facing collapse. Israel's story has been sold to the world as a water miracle. A desert nation that conquered scarcity through innovation, turned salt water into drinking water, and now produces more than it needs. But dig beneath the surface and you'll find something far more unsettling. Faked safety data at desalination plants, a public health crisis hidden in plain sight, geopolitical water deals that could unravel at any moment, and an energy demand so massive that by 2065, Israel will need to build 30 additional desalination units just to keep the taps running. This isn't a success story. This is a high-stakes gamble with no backup plan. If you're fascinated by mega engineering projects that push the limits of what's possible, subscribe to NextBlueprint, hit like, and drop a comment on whether you think this system will survive the next decade. In the 1950s, Israel faced an impossible choice, a young nation flooded with immigrants, surrounded by hostile neighbors, with almost no natural water in the south where they needed to expand. The Sea of Galilee sat in the north, fed by winter rains and the Jordan River. The Negev desert stretched across the south, endless, barren, and completely dry. British engineer Walter Clay Loudermilk had proposed connecting them back in 1937, but the idea seemed insane. Pumping water 130 kilometers across mountains, deserts, and elevations that climbed over 200 meters? The cost alone could cripple the economy. But Israel didn't have a choice, so in 1953, construction began on the National Water Carrier, one of the most ambitious infrastructure projects ever attempted by a developing nation. Mekorot, Israel's national water company, started drilling tunnels through solid rock, building reservoirs that could hold millions of cubic meters, and installing pumps powerful enough to lift water hundreds of meters uphill. The centerpiece was the Eshkol Tunnel, 17 kilometers long, carved through the earth, and at the time of completion, the longest water tunnel on the planet. The project took 11 years. It cost 420 million Israeli lira, about 112 million then, over 1.1 billion in today's money. For a nation barely a decade old, this was economic suicide. Israel went into crippling debt just to make it happen. But the real cost wasn't financial. Syria saw the water diversion as an existential threat. In the early 1960s, Syrian forces launched attacks on the construction sites, trying to destroy the infrastructure before it could be completed. These skirmishes over water rights would later contribute to the tensions that exploded into the Six-Day War in 1967. Israel wasn't just building a pipeline, they were building a military target. When the National Water Carrier finally opened in June 1964, 80% of the water went to agriculture. It transformed the Negev. Farms appeared in the desert, cities expanded. The system supplied half of Israel's drinking water by the 1990s, and even began exporting to Jordan under the 1994 peace agreement. 25 million cubic meters annually, later doubled to 50 million. For decades, this looked like victory. But victory has a cost, and that cost was being paid by the Sea of Galilee. By 2017, the system that saved Israel was killing its source. After 5 years of drought, water levels in the Sea of Galilee plummeted to historic lows. Engineers watched helplessly as the lake dropped below the lower red line, a threshold that triggers emergency restrictions. The problem wasn't just drought, it was demand. Population growth, agricultural expansion, and water exports to Jordan were draining the lake faster than nature could refill it. The National Water Carrier had become a victim of its own success. Israel needed a new solution, and they found it in desalination. The technology had been around since the 1960s, but it wasn't until the early 2000s that reverse osmosis became efficient enough to deploy at scale. In 2005, Israel opened the Ashkelon desalination plant, one of the largest in the world. More plants followed along the Mediterranean coast: Hadera, Sorek, Palmachim, Ashdod. Together, these facilities now produce around 600 million cubic meters of fresh water every year, accounting for 80% of Israel's domestic drinking water. On paper, this was the miracle. Israel had beaten scarcity. But in 2019, something disturbing came to light. 2 major desalination plants were caught falsifying water quality data to cut costs. Inspectors discovered that operators had been faking test results, skipping filtration steps, and prioritizing profit over safety. The scandal barely made international headlines, but it exposed a troubling truth. The system everyone celebrated was being held together by companies willing to cheat, and the real problem was just beginning. Desalinated water is pure. Too pure. When you strip salt and minerals from seawater using reverse osmosis, you don't just remove sodium chloride. You remove everything, including magnesium, a mineral essential for heart function, bone health, and metabolic regulation. In countries that rely on desalination, this has become a silent public health crisis. Israel is no exception. Today, 80% of Israel's drinking water comes from desalination plants. That means the vast majority of the population is consuming water with almost no magnesium. Studies have linked magnesium deficiency to cardiovascular disease, diabetes, and other chronic conditions. Other nations that rely on desalination, like Saudi Arabia, already add magnesium back into the water before it reaches consumers. It's a simple, proven solution. But Israel refuses to do it. According to reports, the Water Authority claims that adding magnesium would raise water prices by 4%. Health experts argue that the long-term cost of treating magnesium-related diseases far outweighs this expense. Yet the government continues to prioritize cost estimates over public health. Water bills are already rising 4% in 2025 due to operational costs and energy demands. The question isn't whether Israel can afford to fortify its water. It's whether they can afford not to. Let us know in the comments if you think profits should come before public health. This is the paradox of Israel's water system. It solved one crisis and created another. But the engineering challenges were far from over. Because by 2022, Israel was about to attempt something that had never been done before. For nearly 60 years, the national water carrier moved water in one direction, south, from the Sea of Galilee to the Negev Desert. But in 2022, Israeli engineers reversed the flow. The plan was audacious. Instead of draining the Sea of Galilee, they would refill it with desalinated water from the Mediterranean. Mekorot constructed a 13-kilometer underground pipeline connecting the lake to a network of infrastructure linked to 5 coastal desalination plants. Water that once flowed from the sea would now flow back into it, pumped uphill against gravity through one of the most energy-intensive processes ever deployed in water management. This was the first time in history that desalinated water was used to replenish a natural lake. Engineers designed the system to handle thousands of cubic meters per hour, with a second phase planned to bring even more water from northern wells and new production plants. On paper, it was brilliant. In practice, it's a race they might be losing. Because despite pumping vast quantities of desalinated water into the Sea of Galilee, the lake is still dropping. In November 2025, water levels fell to 30 centimeters below the lower red line, the lowest point in decades. Environmental activists are sounding alarms. Some warn that the public is being kept in the dark about the true state of the system. Others argue that artificially refilling the lake with desalinated water could cause irreversible ecological damage, altering the lake's chemistry and threatening the delicate balance that sustains its ecosystem. The reverse carrier isn't a solution, it's a stopgap, a desperate attempt to buy time while demand continues to rise and nature continues to fail. And the reason it's failing comes down to a simple, brutal fact. Israel is running out of desalination capacity. Israel's desalination empire was supposed to keep expanding. A 6th major plant was scheduled to come online, boosting production and creating a buffer for dry years. But delays have thrown the entire system into crisis. According to reports, Israel is failing to meet its desalination targets and agriculture is already being cut. Farmers who once relied on steady allocations are now facing restrictions. The margin of safety that once existed is gone. And then, in 2023, during the war in Gaza, the Ashkelon desalination plant, one of the largest in the country, broke down. The facility went offline at the worst possible moment, creating what experts described as a perfect storm. With no backup capacity and rising demand, the system was pushed to the edge. Engineers scrambled to restore operations, but the incident exposed a critical vulnerability. Israel's water security depends on machines that can fail. This isn't just about one plant. It's about a system built on the assumption of continuous expansion. Every new resident, every new farm, every cubic meter of water promised to Jordan requires more desalination. And desalination requires energy, massive amounts of it. If this shocked you, hit like so more people see how fragile these agreements really are. But the real stakes go far beyond Israel's borders. Because when water becomes scarce, it doesn't just affect infrastructure, it affects nations. Under the 1994 peace treaty between Israel and Jordan, Israel agreed to supply Jordan with 25 million cubic meters of water annually. In 2021, that number was doubled to 50 million. For Jordan, a nation with almost no natural freshwater sources, this water is a lifeline. But the agreement is fragile. Tensions between Israel and Jordan have escalated in recent years, particularly during the war in Gaza. Jordan has accused Israel of violating water-sharing agreements, and cooperation has become increasingly strained. Some experts warn that if Israel's own water system continues to falter, it may not be able to meet its obligations to Jordan. And if that happens, the consequences could be catastrophic. Water scarcity has a history of destabilizing nations. Syria's drought from 2006 to 2011 displaced over 1 million farmers, fueling the unrest that eventually erupted into civil war. Jordan faces similar risks. If Israeli water supplies dry up, Jordan doesn't have an alternative. The geopolitical implications are staggering. And then there's the project that was supposed to fix everything, the Red Sea-Dead Sea Canal. The idea was simple. Build a massive canal connecting the Red Sea to the Dead Sea, using the elevation drop to generate hydroelectric power and desalinate water along the way. Israel, Jordan, and the Palestinian Authority all signed on. The estimated cost was around $1 billion. It was supposed to save the Dead Sea, which has been shrinking for decades, and provide water security for the entire region. But in 2021, after years of delays, Jordan quietly canceled the project. No official explanation, no replacement plan, just silence. The dream of a regional mega project that could stabilize water access across borders died without fanfare. And with it went one of the last hopes for long-term cooperation. This is the reality beneath the water miracle narrative. Israel's system isn't just stressed, it's geopolitically explosive. Every cubic meter of desalinated water costs energy. Current Israeli plants use around 3.5 kilowatt hours per cubic meter. That might not sound like much, but scale it up, and the numbers become terrifying. By 2065, Israel's population is projected to grow significantly. To meet demand, the country will need to build 30 additional desalination units and consume over 11 terawatt hours of electricity annually. Between 2055 and 2065 alone, Israel will need to add 11 new plants just to keep pace. That's more than one new plant every year for a decade. This creates an impossible feedback loop. More people need more water. More water needs more desalination. More desalination needs more energy. More energy means more carbon emissions, more infrastructure, more cost. Israel is building a system that requires infinite growth in a world with finite resources. And as energy demands rise, so do costs. Water bills are already climbing 4% in 2025. If desalination continues to expand, prices will keep rising. At some point, water stops being affordable, and when that happens, the entire model collapses. Critics argue that Israel is betting everything on technology without addressing the fundamental problem: consumption. No amount of desalination can sustain unlimited growth. Nature has limits. Energy has limits. And sooner or later, those limits will be reached. Environmental activists are raising alarms that the public is being kept in the dark about the true state of Israel's water system. If the Sea of Galilee continues to drop, engineers will have to rebuild dams and infrastructure to prevent salinity from rising, a process that could take years and cost billions. The lake that once saved Israel could become unusable, and if Israel's domestic system fails, the ripple effects will be felt across the region. Jordan, already one of the most water-scarce nations on Earth, depends on Israeli water to survive. Without it, the country faces a choice between economic collapse and mass migration. Syria's drought showed the world what happens when water runs out: displacement, conflict, war. The American Southwest is watching closely. California, Arizona, and Nevada are already experimenting with desalination as the Colorado River dries up. If Israel, with unlimited investment, cutting-edge technology, and decades of experience, can't make this work, what chance does anyone else have? This isn't just about one country, it's about a global experiment in whether engineering can replace nature, and right now, the results are inconclusive. Israel's water highway was supposed to be a triumph, a symbol of innovation, resilience, and human ingenuity, and in many ways, it is. No other nation has pushed desalination technology as far or as fast. No other country has reversed a national water carrier to refill a dying lake. These are feats of engineering that deserve recognition. But they're also symptoms of a deeper problem. Israel's system isn't sustainable. It's a race against time, population growth, and climate change, a race that may already be lost. The Sea of Galilee is still dropping. Desalination plants are still failing to meet targets. Energy demands are still rising. Geopolitical tensions are still escalating. And beneath it all is a question no one wants to answer. What happens when the technology can't keep up? If Israel, with all its resources, expertise, and political will, can't solve water scarcity, what does that mean for the rest of the Middle East? For Africa, where populations are exploding and rivers are drying up? For the American Southwest, where the Colorado River is vanishing? If a system built on endless expansion hits a wall, does the whole thing come crashing down? The next decade will decide. Israel will either find a way to break the cycle through breakthroughs in solar-powered desalination, atmospheric water generation, or radically reduce consumption, or the system will begin to fail. And if it fails, the consequences won't stop at Israel's borders. This is the real story of Israel's water highway, not a miracle, a warning. This is just the beginning of the global water crisis. If you want to see more investigations into the mega projects shaping and sometimes breaking our future, subscribe to NextBlueprint, drop a like, and let us know what project we should cover next.